tell us about Iceland, the true story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a good pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Warsaw, first time in Poland. Very glad to be here and to tell you about the, I say, comparatively exceptional story, because there was a lot of anger in Iceland, so the feeling wasn't really that a great victory had been won, but obviously from the perspective of how it's gone in other countries, it went well in Iceland, but it took a long time. Now, I want to make sort of two main points. I mean, first some general observation on FX loans, and then on Iceland. Now, the interesting thing is that FX loans for private individuals, they have been around for roughly 40 years, probably longer, but there are examples of that. So we had Australia in the 80s, there was New Zealand, Italy, Germany, Austria in the 1990s, and then after 2000 it sort of mushroomed in many other countries, Central and Eastern Europe, and in Iceland. The general observation that we can make is that Forex loans, they are like a wandering curse. They go from one country to the other, and the same things always happen. There is a very fixed pattern of how these things proceed. So first it seems like a good deal, the banks are selling it, the banks have a certain interest because they have foreign trades of their own that they are hedging. So this is, I mean, the banks start because it's a good business for them. And then, as we know, these loans are sold for a long time. Currency fluctuations happen almost like a law of nature after fairly frequently. So here is something that transpired from law procedures in Australia in the 1980s. So one of the witnesses, who was actually a whistleblower from one of the banks, he pointed out nobody in the right mind, if they had done a proper analysis of what could happen, would have gone ahead with it. So precisely informed, nobody would take these loans, but obviously the problem was that the banks were not in the business of informing properly, as we know. Now, the Austrian National Bank and the financial services in Austria have a huge experience of FX loans. First in Austria, and then obviously because this is what Austrian banks have been selling abroad. Now, they have sort of slowly been moving against these loans in Austria. They have done a lot less in terms of what the Austrian banks are doing abroad. So this is what they concluded. They kind of figured it out in 2008 that it had been a bad idea, but they only said it publicly and decisively in 2013. So foreign currency loans to private consumers are not suitable as a mass product. That is the core of the story. They should not be sold to just everyone. They should only be sold to clients who have or own foreign currency assets, or who have enough money to kind of take on the fluctuations that invariably happen. Another side story to the FX loans is that, quite interestingly, we have seen now banks in the US being fined for the subprime loans. Last to feel the force of the US anger was Deutsche Bank, fined $14 billion. It will never pay $14 billion, but that's kind of what the US thought was proportionally correct. Now, what these banks lending in foreign currency have actually been doing is a kind of a subprime lending, in the sense that people tend to take higher loans because the rates are low. And as we know, then there is no buffer, and when things change, circumstances change, people can't need it. So, in my opinion, I would say that the foreign currency lending is a form of subprime lending. Now, if you go to Iceland, these are sort of just some basic facts about Iceland. It's not a big country, and we have been part of the European Economic Area since 1994, so we have free flow of people, goods, capital, and services. There was a huge expansion in the banking industry in Iceland in after 2003, and this came following privatization of the banks. But actually, some of this had some of the let's say wacky things that the banks were doing that started actually while they were state-owned. So this was like, this was a bingo, this was the hammer in the domestic credit demand, which was far greater than the domestic, that could be provided domestically. And then there were foreign currency inflows into Iceland, so the banks could then start to offer foreign currency loans to Icelanders, and boy, did they receive it. Then there was the winter of 2008, the shock and horror, the collapse of the banking system in Iceland basically these days, 6th to 9th of October in 2008. And this is what many days and nights looked like in Iceland in the winter of 2008 to 2009. There was a lot of anger, and this light is actually fire. It's not sort of being lit up. What happened is that there was a collapse of the currency. There were elections in March 2009, 2 years before time, and the slogan was "Defend the homes, defend the family." So there was a lot of focus, not so much on the FX loans per se, but in general, that the circumstances for people had changed. Many loans in Iceland are also price indexed, so people would really feel this. So there was escalating household debt, whereas people's income was either unchanged or it was falling. And then came this question, could it possibly be that the foreign currency loans had been illegal all the time? Many of these loans, they were consumer loans, and especially popular with people buying cars. So this was then put to test, and in the summer of 2010, the first court ruling came from the Supreme Court. Yes, foreign currency loans were indeed not illegal, but the foreign currency indexed loans were illegal. And obviously, as you will know, the difference is simply that people who normally take out FX loans, they don't get a lot of foreign currency in the pocket, they get their own current domestic currency, but the loans are indexed to another currency. So this is basically then, there was a lot of political pressure. There were about dozens or even more, I think there were something more like 20, 30 cases that slowly came. It took all quite a while, so it wasn't really until 2014 that everything had been settled, that the banks were sort of clear on how to do this. And there were then these settlements, but as I say, after lots of civil cases. Now, obviously, the banks in Iceland did not sort of think that this was a terrific idea, that they should pay back money. But first of all, the old banks had collapsed, and they were partly owned by foreign creditors, and I think that sort of changed the situation somewhat in Iceland, that the politicians were more ready to side with people, and there was a whole lot of focus on private debt. So there was a huge political pressure on the banks and the pressure on politicians to actually do something. So this is how it was sort of brought out. This was a very difficult birth. It wasn't resolved overnight. It took years, And you can just imagine the people who have been struggling with these loans from basically 2008 until 2014. So yes, it's a success story, but it's a success story born out of a lot of pain. It should also be noted that there was a widespread write-down of private debt in Iceland, not only the FX debt, but sort of in general. And that kind of is part of why Iceland has done better than many other countries. So, in a way, we can say that yes, the Icelandic FX saga is relatively unique. It's, the action was relatively swift. It had a positive outcome for borrowers. There was a political support. The banks had failed, and they were foreign owned, so there was kind of easier for politicians, let's say, to side with people and not with the banks. And this was also a way of challenging sort of the almightiness of banks, which I think was a good reminder for the banks that they can't get away with just everything. As I say, FX lending, to my mind, is subprime lending or has a subprime lending element in it. So banks should sort of be made to think about what they're doing. There were also some unique things in what was happening in Iceland, in the fact that after the collapse there were two decisions which were put in place by the Icelandic parliament. And remember, this was during times of great upheaval, so the politicians really felt the pressure of reacting. So one was to decide to set up a special investigative commission, completely independent, made of 3 experts who then hired 20-30 people to work for them, which came out with a report in 2010. So nobody in Iceland can say that we don't know what happened in Iceland. We do know. 2,600 pages, yes, it's long, but it's very thorough and mostly, or has almost explained everything that went on. In addition to that, there was also an office of a special prosecutor set up. There have now been sentences of roughly 30 bankers who have been sentenced, and yes, yesterday 9 bankers were sentenced. And when I talk about sentencing, this is the Supreme Court, this is the highest instance. So yes, I mean, Iceland has in many ways dealt well with the crisis. There is still a lot of anger in Iceland. So although from abroad Iceland is seen as a great success, this is not really the feeling when you are in Iceland. People are not sort of victorious and feeling that everything has been done for them. That's not really the case. So this is basically the short Icelandic version, or short version of the Icelandic FX saga and the collapse in Iceland. But as I say, I think you should keep in mind this general pattern of what foreign currency loans really are.